One of the most dreaded spots in poker is when we face a big bet or raise with a mediocre hand. Let's see how Linus Love, one of the best players in the world, deals with this situation. After defending the big blind with Queen Deuce, Linus check calls the flop with top pair. The turn is a jack, and Linus leads, only to face a raise from Stefan. The river is a complete blank, and Linus gets put to the test for the rest of his stack. At first, Queen Deuce looks like a really clear fold because we have so many better queens to call with. But in this specific situation, our kicker doesn't matter as much as you might think. Given the turn raise and river jam, Button's range is extremely polarized. It wouldn't make sense for him to do this with a queen, so in relative terms, Queen 10 and Queen Deuce are really the same hand. Queen Deuce also has the added advantage of unblocking most of Button's bluffs. If you look at Button's opening range, it's very weighted towards high offsuit cards. This naturally carries over to later streets, making low cards, such as the Deuce, especially good to bluff catch with. By having a kicker that doesn't interfere with his high card region, we increase the probability that Button is bluffing, making our call that much more profitable. Looking at the solver solution, we see a clear preference for calling Queen X with lower kickers. Button is bluffing with lots of hands like King 9 and 10-8, so we definitely want to avoid having a 9 or 10. And while he is bluffing with the occasional King 3 and King Deuce, these hands make up a much smaller part of his bluffing range since he doesn't have the offsuit versions of them. All in all, holding a deuce has the effect of weighting Button towards bluffs, which is why the solver calls Queen Deuce at a higher frequency than Queen 10. But wait a minute, you might say. If having a deuce is so good, wouldn't having two deuces be even better? Well, as tempting as it might be to call down with deuces 100% of the time, the fact is that we will always prefer to have a pair to the board. Queen Deuce and pocket deuces are both hands with excellent unblockers, but the difference is that Queen Deuce also blocks some value on top of unblocking bluffs. You can think of the deuce as a card with neutral blocking effects, which is to say that it blocks neither bluff nor value, and the queen as a card with positive blocking effects. So the only time we call down with hands like deuces is when we are already calling all of our one pair to the board and still need more hands to hit our target frequency. Something that mostly happens when facing a small river bet. Conversely, when we are facing extremely large bets, the percentage of our range that we need to defend is much lower. Against a 2x pot size bet, for example, even Queen Deuce is folding all the time. We can easily hit our target frequency by calling Jack X alone, and there is no reason to call Queen X over Jack X when the latter blocks so much more of Button's value range. As for which combos of Jack X are better to call, you can probably already guess that the solver prefers defending the lower kickers over the higher ones. If you're following so far, you might be thinking to yourself, if the solver prefers to call down with hands that contain a deuce, wouldn't that make the deuce a great card to bluff with as well? And you would be absolutely right. Looking at Button's strategy, hands with a deuce or a 3 tend to bluff much more often compared to higher combos. Not a surprise given that they block big blind's best calls. But here's where it starts to get confusing. If Button is bluffing with so much deuce X, why does big blind still prefer to call hands with a deuce? Wouldn't it now be better to call with the higher kickers instead? To understand this, let's take a look at a simple toy game. Here, out of position is the aggressor, with a range of aces and some bluffs. In position's range consists of 7s through 4s, which are all pure bluff catchers. Notice how out of position selects his bluffs. 4-5 suited, which he only has a tiny amount of, is bluffing all the time, while 6-7 offsuit is giving up at high frequency. This is happening because in position is calling 4s and 5s more often than 6s and 7s, making 4-5 more valuable in terms of blockers. At the same time, out-of-position bluffing with 4-5 doesn't discourage in-position from calling with 4s and 5s, because out-of-position's bluffing range still contains way more 6-7 than 4-5. The point is that bluffing a certain hand at high frequency doesn't necessarily mean the hand will be a big part of your bluffing range. This is why the deuce is such a powerful card for both aggressor and defender. Deuce-X combos are scarce enough such that the aggressor can bluff them all the time without discouraging the defender from calling down with bluff catchers that contain a deuce. Remember, scarcity is king. Just like in real life where scarce items are worth more, bluffs that are scarce also tend to have higher EV. Here's another example that illustrates the same concept. In this triple barrel line, Button is bluffing all the time with hands like Queen Deuce and 4-5. These low-suited combos make up a relatively small part of Button's overall range, so even if he bluffs them all the time, Big Blind cannot exploit him by preferring to bluff catch with higher cards. Indeed, out of all Big Blind's King X hands, it's the humble King Deuce that is calling at the highest frequency. Now consider what happens if Button were to bluff with the higher offsuit combos instead. Big Blind would have a really easy counter strategy of calling King X with lower kickers and folding the ones with higher kickers. And once that happens, it would be a big mistake for Button to bluff with hands like Queen Jack. For this reason, bluffing with Queen Jack cannot be GTO. Scarcity sounds like a simple enough concept to implement, but you might be thinking to yourself, surely there's more to blockers than this. Whatever happened to choosing bluffs that block Villain's nut hands and unblock his missed draws? To give you some idea of the relative importance of these factors, let's make a few changes to our toy game. Let's add a bunch of 6-3 and 7-3 to in-positions range to represent nut hands that are always calling. You might think that this would make 6-7 a better hand to bluff with, since we block in-position's highest EV calls. But when we rerun the sim, we see that the solver still prefers to bluff with 4-5. Next, let's add a bunch of 4-5 to in-positions range to represent missed draws that are always folding to a bet. Again, upon resolving, we see that this has very little effect on out-of-position strategy. Despite blocking a chunk of missed draws and not blocking any nut hands, 4-5 is still bluffing all the time. It's a shocking result, because these things are exactly what most players will look out for when choosing bluffs. And yet, in this example at least, scarcity is by far the dominant factor. What this goes to show is that you can't really go wrong with bluffing scarce hands on the river. Regardless of what else you block or unblock, Deuce-X will be at least 0 EV to bluff in most situations, and outright profitable in many others. Another interesting property of hands that contain a deuce is that they often have better implied odds. Take a look at UTG's response versus a 3-bet. Deuces is a slightly higher EV call than 9s, despite being a much weaker hand. Part of the reason is that in position is not 3-betting 3s through 8s very often, nor does he have much 8x and below. So deuces actually isn't that far off from 9s in terms of raw equity. For the most part, we are either crushed by a bigger pair or flipping against a hand with 2 overcards. On top of that, the times we flop a set, deuces is likely to win more money than 9s. This is because the board tends to be much more disconnected with a deuce on it. Here's a simple experiment. How many connected boards can you think of that contain a 9? How many can you think of that contain a deuce? The more coordinated the board is, the less inclined the aggressor will be to stack off with his overpairs. So even if we do get lucky and hit a set of 9s, the pot tends to be much smaller on average. Whereas if we spike a set of deuces, there is a much higher chance that our opponent will pay us off, since the board isn't likely to be as scary looking. Putting 2 and 2 together, this makes deuces a slightly more profitable hand to defend versus the 3-bet, since it has similar EV the times it doesn't hit a set, and better EV the times that it does. What we've seen in this video is that the deuce is a much more relevant card than most players think. In particular, the scarcity of deuce-X combos means that they will more often than not make good bluffing candidates. But how else should we choose our bluffs? There is one more important concept to know here, and I discuss it in this webinar for GTO Wizard. I also go into more detail about why blocking nut hands or unblocking misdraws isn't as important as you might think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.